had some gym weights at home that I wasn't using anymore, so I decided to put them up for sale on Facebook Marketplace. It was something simple, easy, like any other online transaction I'd done before. I posted the pictures, set the price, and waited. It didn't take long for someone to reach out. The profile was from a guy named Lucas, with a pretty normal profile picture. Nothing suspicious at first glance, but something felt off. He got straight to the point. Too straight, actually. He started asking about the weights in a way that made me uncomfortable. You know when someone seems way too interested in something that most people wouldn't really care that much about? He kept asking if I'd be available at night, and I started noticing that his messages always came at really odd hours, late at night. Even so, I tried not to worry. I thought maybe he just had a different work schedule or something, so I decided to respond. Lucas insisted that we meet that same night. Something inside me hesitated, but at the same time, I just wanted to get rid of those weights and be done with it. What could go wrong? I thought. I had done plenty of sales before with no problems. We agreed to meet near my house, in a somewhat well-lit area, just to be safe. As I looked through his messages, though, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was like deep down, I knew something wasn't right. This sale was starting off strange, but I had no idea what was about to happen. He showed up a little later than we'd agreed on. It was almost midnight, and I was starting to reconsider whether I should have arranged this meeting at all. I was standing near a streetlight, trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. But, you know when the silence of the night feels too heavy? Like the air around you is thick with some kind of invisible tension? That's exactly how I felt. When I finally saw his car approaching, my heart started to race a bit. It looked like a regular car, one of those old, beat-up models. The headlights were dim, almost like he was trying to go unnoticed. He parked further away than I expected, which immediately put me on edge. Instead of getting out of the car right away, he stayed inside for a few minutes. I couldn't really see what he was doing, but the wait was making me more and more anxious. Finally, the door slowly opened, and he stepped out. It was hard to see his face at first since the streetlight didn't reach that far. But the way he walked, there was something off about it, slow and heavy, like he was trying to hide something. I took a few steps closer, trying to act calm, but inside, I was already screaming at myself to just walk away. He came closer with an expression that didn't match someone who was there to buy weights. No smile, no small talk, just a dry, "Hey." He asked if the weights were in the trunk, like he wanted to get this over with as quickly as possible. Everything in me was screaming that this wasn't right, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. But as he kept getting closer, the sense of danger became impossible to ignore. When he got near enough, I finally saw his face more clearly, and that's when everything started to fall apart. His eyes, they were empty, emotionless. He didn't look like someone there to buy weights. He looked like someone with something much darker in mind. He stopped just a few steps away and glanced around, as if checking to see if anyone else was nearby. "Where are the weights?" he asked, but it sounded more like a command than a question. Something told me he didn't care about the weights at all. I instinctively took a step back, trying to keep some distance. My heart was pounding in my chest, and every second felt longer than the last. I was trying to stay calm, but my instincts were screaming at me. I replied with a shaky voice that the weights were in the trunk, but I couldn't bring myself to move. That's when I noticed he wasn't alone. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow moving near his car, someone I hadn't noticed before. There was another person lurking. My blood ran cold. We were on an empty street, late at night, and now I was facing not one, but two strangers, both with intentions I couldn't figure out. "Do you want to see the weights first?" I tried to ask, my voice coming out weaker than I intended. He didn't answer. Instead, he took another step closer, invading what little space I had left. I knew in that moment I was in danger. The air felt thick, and my mind raced, trying to figure out what might happen next. The second person, the one I had barely noticed, was now approaching too, but in a sneaky way, like they were trying to catch me off guard. The guy in front of me moved even closer, and that's when I realized he wasn't here for the weights. This was something else, something far more dangerous. I had to get out of there, fast. "I'll grab the weights from the car," I said, trying to sound confident, as I slowly started moving backward toward my vehicle. My hands were sweating, and my heart was pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. He kept his eyes on me, and I could feel the tension rising in the air, like a rope being pulled tight. As I walked slowly, trying not to draw attention, I noticed the second guy picking up his pace. He was getting closer way too fast. That's when it hit me. They were trying to surround me. Adrenaline kicked in, and without thinking, I spun around and ran in the opposite direction. I heard the first guy shout something, but I couldn't make out the words. I just ran. I ran like my life depended on it, feeling the cold, hard pavement under my feet as the shadows of the two guys seemed to grow behind me. All I could think about was making it to the neighbor's house, the only house with a light still on in this deserted street. My lungs were burning, and fear was the only thing pushing me forward. When I finally reached the door of the house, I started pounding on it over and over, as if my life depended on it. And maybe it did. The sound of their footsteps faded, but I didn't dare look back. I kept pounding on the door in a panic, praying that someone would answer quickly. My heart felt like it was about to explode out of my chest, and the overwhelming sense of danger still gripped me. Finally, the door opened, and the surprised face of an elderly man appeared in the doorway. Without thinking, I rushed inside, almost stumbling over my words as I tried to explain what was happening. He looked at me wide-eyed, clearly startled by my condition, but he let me in. As soon as the door closed behind me, I felt a temporary sense of relief, as if an invisible barrier had shielded me from those two guys outside. But even then, the fear kept gnawing at my mind. I carefully glanced out the window, trying to see if they were still around, but everything was quiet. Their car was gone, and there was no sign of the two of them. Maybe they had given up when they saw that I had escaped. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered. I couldn't shake the thought that they might come back, or worse, that they knew where I lived. The night didn't end there. The fear and unease followed me for days, making me check every corner of my house and glance over my shoulder every time I went out. That incident left a mark on me, a constant reminder that the most ordinary things can turn into nightmares in an instant. Since then, I've never trusted an online meeting to sell anything again. And every time I hear a strange noise in the middle of the night, I remember that moment when I realized I was surrounded, alone, and at the mercy of two strangers with much darker intentions than I had ever imagined. I had escaped by the skin of my teeth, but the fear that something like this could happen again never really went away. I had that old pinball machine stored in the garage for years, collecting dust. I always thought I'd fix it up one day or maybe set it up in the basement as a nostalgic piece. But the truth is, I never found the time or motivation to do it. So, I decided it was time to let it go. I listed the machine on Marketplace, snapped a few pictures, and soon had some interested buyers. Nothing out of the ordinary. A group reached out pretty quickly. There were 3 people, or at least the person messaging me seemed to be speaking for 2 others. They asked about the condition of the machine, if it still worked, and things like that. I was honest, told them it was a bit rusty and would likely need some repairs. They didn't seem to mind, which was a bit odd in itself. But I didn't think much of it. I just wanted to sell it and clear out space in the garage. The negotiation went smoothly. They seemed excited to pick up the machine and asked if they could come to my house to check it out in person. Normally, I don't like setting up meetings at home, but since the pinball machine was big and heavy, it made sense for them to come here. We agreed to meet the next afternoon. I figured it would be quick. They'd see the machine, make an offer, and I'd be free of another piece of old junk. But as the time of the meeting approached, I started to get one of those feelings you can't quite explain. You know, the sense that something's off, but you can't put your finger on it? Still, I shrugged it off, thinking I was just being paranoid. After all, what could go wrong in a simple sale? At the agreed time, they showed up. But instead of the 2 or 3 people I was expecting, 4 guys appeared at the door. They arrived in a beat-up car, the kind that looked like it was on the verge of breaking down at any moment. When they got out, I noticed they were kind of spread out, like they had some plan in mind that didn't involve just the pinball machine. One of them, who seemed to be the leader, walked up front with a forced smile. He said they were excited to see the machine, but the way he was looking around made me uneasy. It wasn't the curious look of someone about to make a purchase. It was more like he was scanning the house, assessing every detail. Something didn't feel right, and my gut started to scream at me. The other guys stayed back a bit, whispering among themselves. One stayed closer to the car, almost like he was standing guard, while the other two slowly moved closer, watching everything silently. I tried to stay calm and act normal, but my stomach was in knots. "Can you show us the machine?" the leader asked, while his friends spread out even more across the yard, as if they were searching for something. I showed them the way to the garage, trying to sound casual, but the tension was too thick to ignore. They started walking behind me, and as we got closer to the garage door, I could feel the weight of the situation growing heavier. When I opened the garage door and showed them the pinball machine, the leader signaled for the others to come over. They began circling the machine, but not in the usual way. It seemed like they were more interested in what was around it than the pinball machine itself. One of them suddenly asked, "Do you live here alone?" The question caught me off guard, and the casual way he asked, while looking toward the house, sent a chill down my spine. "No, my family's inside." I lied, trying to sound convincing. I saw one of them glance at another, as if they were exchanging some kind of signal. The leader then turned to me, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and asked if they could go inside to grab something to drink. That's when my internal alarms went off completely. No one buying a pinball machine makes that kind of request. I stepped back a little, putting some distance between us, and said I preferred to keep everything outside. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The leader's smile disappeared, and the others stood still, watching me with more intensity. The sense of danger was now so strong, it was almost suffocating. One of them, who had been quiet until then, moved closer to the garage door and started pushing it slowly, closing it a bit, as if he was trying to trap us inside. My heart started racing. I knew I had to get out of this situation before it escalated. My heart pounded as I saw the garage door being pushed closed, slowly but surely. The guy doing it wasn't being direct. He tried to act casual, but his eyes gave him away. He was ready to do something. I stepped back, trying to appear calm, but my mind was already on high alert. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but it was no use. He just shrugged and smiled, a strange, unsettling smile, while continuing to push the door, inching closer to fully closing it. I knew that if it shut, things would only get worse. That's when the leader turned to me, dropping any pretense. "You know," he started, "we were thinking of taking a look inside. I bet you've got a few other things we could work out a deal on." He said this while the other two started closing in, slowly surrounding me. My mind raced. They weren't here for the pinball machine. That had been a distraction. I had to act fast. "Actually," I said, trying to sound confident, "my brother's inside. He just went to grab some tools, but he'll be back any minute." I made it up on the spot, but I knew I needed to make it sound like I wasn't alone. The silence that followed was deafening. The guy pushing the door stopped for a second, evaluating the situation. They exchanged glances, and the leader took a step back. I could tell the lie had thrown them off, but they were still undecided. Not wasting any time, I seized the moment and suggested we could reschedule for another day when my brother would be home to help load the machine. "It'd be easier for everyone," I added, forcing a smile. They hesitated, and for a moment I thought one of them might challenge me. But finally, the leader nodded slowly. "That's probably best," he said in a flat tone. "Let's go, guys." As they walked back to the car, my body relaxed, but the fear was still there, pulsing through me. As they walked toward the car, every second felt like it stretched into eternity. My body was tense, and all I could think about was how things could have taken a much darker turn. I didn't take my eyes off them for a moment, hoping they wouldn't change their minds and come back to finish whatever it was they had clearly started planning. When they finally got into the car, I felt a brief sense of relief, but I wasn't ready to let my guard down just yet. The engine took a while to start, which only heightened my anxiety. But eventually, the car roared to life, and they drove off, disappearing around the corner of the street. I stood there for a long time, staring into the emptiness, still processing what had just happened. The silence around me felt heavier than ever. Fear was still coursing through my body, and even though my heart was starting to slow down, it was pounding hard in my chest. It wasn't until I forced myself to take a deep breath that I realized how much I was shaking. I went back inside and locked the door behind me, glancing out the window one more time. Nothing. They were really gone, but the feeling of danger still lingered. I paced around the living room, trying to understand how I'd let things get to that point. It all started with a simple sale, and I almost became the victim of something far worse. For days after that, every little noise made me jump. I checked the locks on the house repeatedly, and the image of those 4 guys staring at me while they tried to invade my home stayed burned into my mind. The pinball machine? I never wanted to see or talk about it again. The lesson I learned? Never again would I invite strangers to my house for a sale. That experience changed me, and the thought that I could have been targeted for something much worse still haunts me. I was looking for a new phone but didn't want to pay the ridiculous prices at the stores. So I went straight to Facebook Marketplace. Scrolling through the listings, I found exactly what I was looking for. A recent model, in good condition, reasonably priced. Everything seemed perfect. The seller had a few good reviews, which gave me confidence that it wasn't a scam. I reached out, and right off the bat, he was pretty straightforward. We agreed to meet the next day. I thought it was interesting that he suggested meeting at a police station. At the time, it seemed sensible and safe. After all, who would try anything shady in front of a police station, right? The idea of making the purchase in a busy, secure location erased any doubts I had. We scheduled to meet in the late afternoon. Everything seemed to be going as planned, and I saw no reason to worry. It seemed like one of those quick deals. Meet, hand over the money, grab the product, and that's it. Little did I know, things were about to take a very strange turn. On the day of the meeting, just as I was getting ready to head to the police station, I received a message from the seller. He said something had come up and suggested we meet at a different location, a bit more out of the way. "It's more convenient for me," he said. "A quiet spot, no traffic." I felt uneasy for a moment, but I ended up brushing it off. Maybe he really just wanted to avoid the hassle of parking near the station, or maybe he was in a hurry. So I agreed. After all, the new spot wasn't too far, and it was still daylight. As I drove to the new location, a slight worry began to creep in. It was a more isolated street with few houses and dim streetlights. Definitely not what I had expected. But I tried not to overthink it. "It's just a sale," I told myself. I'm probably being paranoid. Still, the fact that he changed the location at the last minute kept playing over in my head. When I arrived at the new spot and parked, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was much more deserted than I had imagined. The houses were spread out, and there was almost no one around. The sky was getting darker, and the few streetlights that illuminated the area flickered irregularly. I felt exposed, like I was being watched. I looked around, searching for the seller's car, but saw no one. I checked the time on my phone and realized I was a bit early. My discomfort grew as the minutes ticked by. The almost completely empty street only added to my anxiety. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he's just running late, I thought. But then I got another message from him, saying he was on his way and would be there soon. That's when it really hit me. Why had he been so quick to change the location? And now, why was I waiting alone in such a remote area? As I mulled over these thoughts, I saw a car in the distance, slowly approaching down the street. My heart began to race. It stopped a few meters away, and from where I was, I couldn't see who was inside. The windows were dark, and the car looked old, almost abandoned. Suddenly, everything felt much worse. Every fiber of my being told me something was very, very wrong. I felt panic rising. Here I was, alone, in an isolated area, with an unknown car creeping toward me, and everything about this situation now felt like a trap about to spring shut. The car stopped a few meters from where I was. The engine stayed on, but no one got out. My heart was pounding, and the air around me felt heavy. I tried to convince myself to wait a few more seconds, but the tension was unbearable. Something was definitely wrong. There was no reason for me to stay. In one swift motion, I put my car into gear and started driving away. My instincts were screaming at me to leave as quickly as possible. As I pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the headlights of the car behind me start to move. They were following me. Adrenaline surged through me, and I floored the accelerator. The deserted streets weren't helping. Every turn seemed to lead to another isolated area. The car behind me was closing in, and I knew I had to do something. Without thinking, I made a sharp right turn onto a narrow street, trying to lose them. But then, I heard a loud screech. Something was wrong with my car. I pulled over quickly, and when I got out to check, I saw that my tire had been slashed. My blood ran cold. They knew exactly what they were doing. I looked around, desperate, realizing I couldn't stay there. I decided to run on foot, darting through the dimly lit streets, not sure if they were following me on foot or still in the car. All I knew was that I had to find safety. I ran without looking back, the sound of my heavy breathing and the pounding of my heart echoing in my ears. Every street I passed seemed darker and more deserted than the last, but I kept going, driven by pure survival instinct. Panic consumed me with every step, and I had no idea what those guys would do if they caught up to me. The only thought pounding in my head was that I had to keep running. After what felt like an eternity, I finally saw lights up ahead. A convenience store, still open, with a few people coming and going. It was like a wave of relief washed over me. I ran to the store, rushed inside, and blended in with the customers. I paused for a moment to catch my breath, feeling cold sweat drip down my face. The feeling of being hunted still clung to me, but inside the store, I felt a little safer. As I discreetly looked out the window, trying to see if their car was still around, the reality of the situation hit me hard. What started as a simple phone purchase had almost turned into a deadly trap. I had ignored all the signs. The last-minute location change, the isolated environment, the seller's odd behavior, and I nearly paid the price for it. After that day, online transactions were never the same for me. The fear of falling into an ambush, of being so vulnerable, left its mark. Ever since then, every little strange detail puts me on high alert. That feeling that, at any moment, things can go horribly wrong. It's something I carry with me to this day.